Did you fall into the understanding of reps? It's something that not everybody understands, not everybody applies. You clearly do this in every area of your life.
I am acutely aware of the work that it takes to be able to achieve goals. That work primarily for people who are around not just big thinkers, but also big doers. That work primarily is around relationships. So a lot of people, if they feel like they haven't got the outcome that they want, they're either too excited about the outcome, not the reps, or they're doing the wrong reps. So making sure you're clear on what are the right reps for the goal you want, bringing relationships into that equation so you can not only enhance how big you want to go, but also accelerate your path of getting there. So much of my professional career, like by far the overwhelming focus has been on relationships. How can I make myself as valuable as possible so I have more value to give?
Welcome back to Flipping the Lid. You can tell we're in a different environment today. Sometimes when I'm on the road, I get the pleasure of working with some of the most impactful people in the world. James Whittaker is one of those individuals, and we met not long ago, but in that time, I can not only sense the depth, I can not only sense his clarity and conviction to who he is as a husband and as a father, but it's very obvious how present he is in every moment, and that also leading into his superpower of helping people get really clear on who they are and what they want, and then putting plans and systems in places to get there, right? He is the host of a podcast, Win the Day, that's got over 50 million views. He's worked with, interviewed some of the world leaders, Olympic athletes, some billion-dollar CEOs, but at the end of the day, it's the way he connects with humans that I think makes him so powerful. And so I can't wait to dig into this conversation today, and welcome for being with us, brother.
Brian, thank you so much for having me on the show. It always makes my day better when I see you. So yes, thanks for having me.
You know what, man? I feel the same way. Like it's one of those things that sometimes you meet people and you just know.
For sure.
Right? And again, it's similar to how you even said this. Dr. Jeff Spencer connected us, and he's one of those people that if he connects me with somebody, I just trust it because every time it's been spot on, and you were that way. So I'm excited that we get to meet today in person for the first time. We just got done recording your show,
and you crushed it too. And one thing I really love about you, I want to acknowledge just the way that you turn up with generosity. I think people like Dr. Jeff Spencer, people like you, and something that I try to be as well. Hopefully I'm leading with that as well. But this idea of you just want to find out the people in your network who have like-minded values and want to reach out to see how they can help each other. That's it. Anytime, phone call, text message, audio message. What are you up to and what can I do to help? They're the people that I want in my circle, and that's why I'm honored to be here with you today.
Thank you. I feel the same way, man. So I gave a high-level intro based on who you are, but the only question I ask every guest on this show is, who are you in your words?
In my words, I am someone who grew up with a lot of identity issues because I was raised in a household where my father became very successful. His career was taking off as I was going through high school. So it was almost as his career trajectory started to take off, my identity started to taper off at a similar correlation. That manifested in a debilitating anxiety disorder, which I certainly didn't help through any number of horrible life decisions around that time. And I feel like the things that I did as a teenager and the difficult moments that I put my parents through, I have the utmost respect for them, and everything that I do now is to prove to them that they are the most amazing parents that I could ever have wanted. So I'm driven by an enormous sense of service to give back to them because of those years that I put them through. Nothing too crazy, but it was certainly a source of shame that it took me a long time to come to terms with when I had everything that I could have possibly needed to succeed. And then since becoming a father 5 years ago, I realized that my mission, which became clearer to want to change the world, it started to shrink once I became a parent. The mission became, I need to lead by example for my kids. When they were born, it sort of became, how do I help them be the best that they can be? And I've realized more and more with each week that passes that one of the best ways to do that is for me to be the best that I can be and to live true. So that's who I am.
Yeah. I really appreciate the gratitude and appreciation you highlight your parents with out of the gate. And I know we talked about my parents on the show, and it's always something that I struggle with in communicating because there's two sides to every single coin, right? And I am unbelievably grateful, unbelievably loyal, and I will always support and advocate for the role my parents played. But I also have gotten to a place where I can start to see how some of the intentional approaches had unintentional ramifications. As I listen to you talk, it's interesting because you're in a place now where you say that you are so committed to making sure that they know that they're the best parents, but it's almost as if whatever you say you put them through was 100% your responsibility. I'm curious, and not to throw your parents under the bus, because I don't mean it as they're clearly people that you're going to always support and be aligned with, like love on them, appreciate them. But you also talked about these identity issues and your dad's career taking one direction while you were not. And there's all these little nuances to those dynamics. What were the areas that you think your parents had unintentional impacts in your childhood development that maybe led to these things you say you put them through?
I am someone who's really big on this idea of extreme ownership. Like, I want to be responsible and accountable for absolutely everything. I do not believe... It's difficult because as a human, I know that none of us are perfect and we all have these different things. But my father was very big in personal finance, and to be able to see him take the stages and speak at these events, and I would be there selling books and packaging CD-ROMs and audio cassettes because they were the things when you're 7 years old. That was the technology at the time, and that was my way of helping. So really, and my mother became a psychologist for victims of child sexual abuse. Okay. So I grew up very much with equal parts of the entrepreneurial style as well as the empathy for the real struggles that people are going through. Honestly, I really can hand on heart say this. I don't really have any negative unintended consequences that I feel like they put on me. And that's my responsibility now to lead the next generation. I want to be taking, just as I hope my children take full 100% ownership for them as well.
Yeah. And I can appreciate that. I'll accept that for what that is, because I know where you're coming from with that. And I agree with you.
I'm also not saying it's the right way, by the way. No. That's for me, that's the way.
No. And again, I'm not saying it is right or wrong. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that the concept of extreme ownership is something that I adopt in my life as well. And it's something that we teach to try to get everyone to find a way to take responsibility and ownership for everything positive and negative that's ever happened in their life, right? And so for me, the question doesn't come from a pointing of blame. It comes from just patterns. Right? Like I had mentioned to you in your show, I grew up in a house where there was one right way to do everything. I didn't always know what that was. That wasn't intentional. That wasn't something that necessarily led me, but it also always put me in this binary sense of right or wrong, right? Unintentionally. I'm the one who has to take responsibility and ownership to pull myself out of it. You're clearly doing that in the way that you honor them and with your choices and how you're choosing to live your life today with your own kids. I'm curious because I want to go back to the moment you say you put them through a bunch of stuff. What were you feeling at the time? What were you experiencing internally at the time? And what were the external actions that put them through all this stuff?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I've ever talked about some of this stuff on a podcast before. So this is really good. We'll get into some fun stuff. The reason about the extreme ownership is because I read a quote that says the more accountable you are for those decisions, the more empowered you are to be able to change them. I think it's a Steve Maraboli quote. Mm-hmm. So that's what it was. The reason that I've been able to create the success I have in my life is because I took that full ownership. The moment there was any doubt for me to say that it was someone else's responsibility, it would dilute my effectiveness even a little bit. And that was completely unacceptable to me. So I grew up in a household where there's been a lot of conversations in the last few years about this idea of sort of white privilege for, people have different opinions on those types of things. To me, the greatest advantage I had in my household growing up was I got to sit down at the dinner table and have conversations with very successful people and just participate and be part of those conversations. So ever since then, I've not really been in a room where it's felt uncomfortable for me to talk to people of really any level, from people who are homeless right through to billion-dollar entrepreneurs. I just don't really feel uncomfortable in those environments. I'm very happy and social talking to everybody. So that's been a really great example. So as I was in that framework, growing up where eventually we moved into a nice house and we had these different things, not that my family in any way has really been big on things like material possessions. We never had like cable TV or anything like that because my dad would always say, why would you pay money to rot your brain watching TV? And I got to say, it makes a lot of sense. So some of my behaviors around that time, hanging out with my buddies in high school, as all of us were doing, were, drinking too much, smoking cigarettes, blowing up mailboxes and all those types of things, and just bad food decisions, not educating myself enough around things like nutrition and sleep and recovery. I could have just shortened so much of my life and the path that I wanted to go on. I can see now that things need to take their own logical path. And I also understand that some people just take a lot longer to bloom. There are people I know who bloomed in high school and were never able to sustain it, with some absolutely devastating consequences. And I feel like since I reached that point where I was able to bloom and recognize that I did have some value in the world, I was able to reconnect back with that successful energy that the family had provided that enabled me to have the impact I want to have.
Yeah. When was the moment that you realized it was time for you to bloom?
There's been a few pivotal moments in my career. There was one when I'd been waiting for, I feel like I'd done the reps. I'm sure you've had this experience as well in your own life, where you feel like you have done the reps and you haven't received the reward. And you're like, just whoever is up there, just please give me a sign that I'm on the right path. And eventually I had an opportunity to be introduced to Success magazine many years ago. I had this book came out, Think and Grow Rich, The Legacy. And they said, we would love to feature your story in the summer issue of our print magazine. And I was like, wow, I used to subscribe to Success magazine back in the day. Now to be asked to be featured in that magazine was an incredible moment. But all the work that I had been doing was telling other people's stories. I'd become an expert at interviewing people. I'd interviewed hundreds of people and told their stories in books and film projects and all of these different things, but I had never publicly told my story. And the reason I hadn't done that is because I had an enormous sense of shame around that. Interviewing people who have been through some of the most horrific things of all time. Like I've interviewed people who, I interviewed a guy, Todd Love, who was a Marine who woke up in a hospital bed with both his legs blown off, who felt down and he felt at the hospital bed where his legs were supposed to be. The doctor came in and amputated his arm. So he was a triple amputee at the age of 18. Like the people that I've interviewed, I'm acutely aware of resilience and how difficult life can be for some people who might have been dealt what appeared like a really bad hand at the start of life. That, of course, in all of the cases of the people I've interviewed, were able to leverage that as a strength. But comparing that to my own pain, I realized how minuscule, or my own journey felt so minuscule and not relevant and not worthy. And that is what also contributed to a lot more of those feelings of shame. And then it was when I realized, you know what, the moments that I have had in my life that were extremely difficult and demoralizing for me, I had to put that out there. And that's when I finally confronted all of those issues that I had with this debilitating anxiety disorder that had a grip around my neck for decades. Once I was able to overcome that and finally put that story out there, that was when I had people reaching out being like, wow, it's so nice to hear people talking about and normalizing some of those things. Since that point, I realized we all have an amazing story to tell. And that's something that I love about what you educate your audience with as well, is that we do all have an amazing story to tell. We just got to tap into it.
Every one of us. And I really do think that it's the comparison to other people's stories that keep most people trapped and keep most people from sharing it. You know, I didn't share this with you, but I want to go down this path, and then I've got another question. You know, I often talk about that there's 4 areas that we all suffer. It's the things that are left unsaid, the things that we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate or understand, or the things that are left undone. The power in telling your own story is that you're actually acting and doing and alleviating the suffering internally for yourself. But someone like yourself who understands the power of storytelling and who also is in a position to have audiences to receive it means that you're giving people permission to feel and say things that they wouldn't have otherwise, and words to articulate and understand them in a way that they may not have through you. And so what's really cool is this what I hope everyone will hear through this element of storytelling. It is always the right time to tell your story, right? And there's lots of people that say, speak from the scar, not from the wound. That I also don't 100% always agree with. However, it's learning how to tell your story, but more importantly, the lessons that you can extract from it. And that's what you just did. And that's what you showed, which is so powerful.
Yeah, 100%. And just really quickly on that, I interviewed a guy who became a mentor of mine, Dr. Mark Goulston. He passed away about a year ago, an amazing guy, meant so much to me in the short time that I knew him. And he got the present day James Whittaker to go back and walk into the room at my absolute lowest point and to have that conversation with the strong, powerful me now. And that was an incredible, gives me, I'm shaking as I talk about that. That's a interesting thing. So for people who have some things that they might not have feel like they've dealt with fully, if you are successful now or you regard yourself as successful, go back and have a conversation with you at your lowest point and rewrite the narrative, rewrite that moment that happened, so you can start to alleviate a lot of the shame that you might feel in the present due to something that happened decades ago.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the reality too. Like, if you understand the human scale of frequency that David Hawkins mapped out, shame is the lowest registerable frequency, right? So as soon as shame and blame exist, everything else goes out the window. And that's what's also really interesting. Anxiety has a similar pattern, right? Once anxiety takes over, executive functioning, functional movement, like ability to regulate emotions, like navigate thought, it all goes away, right? Anxiety can take over. Now, you clearly had a debilitating anxiety problem, I'm going to call it. How did anxiety show up for you? And I mean that twofold. How did it show up in your body so that you were even aware that it was there? And how did it show up in your world through your actions or whatever the anxiety caused you to do or not do or see or not see?
I can pinpoint it very specifically. It would show up for me in environments that I couldn't escape from. So if it was something that was important, like an exam in high school, where they tell you that how you perform on this exam is going to determine what university you get into, which is going to determine what job you get, which is going to determine the rest of your life. So that was one big thing, how I would show up for those high school exams and then as well for university. And then I had a job at a liquor store, just a casual job. And they said to me one Sunday, they said, this Sunday coming up, you're going to be opening the store by yourself. And that to me, of course, is the perfect storm of an environment that I could not escape from because what if I'm there? And you asked me about the physical symptoms. For me, that wasn't stuff where I just felt uncomfortable and then I would move on after a couple of minutes. For me, I would feel, it was like these barbs of fire that would whip around your arms. I can still feel it so easily anytime I recount that. And then you would slowly start to lose consciousness. And that was it. It was usually about 22 minutes. Like, that's how specific it was. About 22 minutes into being into one of these environments, that I would feel those lashings on my arm. I would feel myself start to lose consciousness, and then I would either throw up, faint, or both.
Wow.
And that's what it was. And then you wake up like, what the hell just happened? And that's what happened to me in that time at the liquor store. I was checking my watch constantly. We talk about this idea of think and grow rich, but back then it was think and grow poor. That's all I was doing. I was willing this situation to happen by constantly checking my phone. This happened to me too many times. And once it's already happened to you once, all you do is live in fear because you're connected with that energy of this is going to happen again. And all I was trying to do was to make it to 22 minutes because I knew after that, if I could get past that, then I would be okay. And that was it. Brutal. When I was in the corporate world, the same thing would happen. We might be there in an important all-company meeting, and that was an environment where I felt like I couldn't escape from. And you would have the same sensations where you're instinctively like you're in the Secret Service looking for exits. Yeah. How can I get out of this environment? And that is a completely unsustainable life because you can't hold down a job.
Yeah.
Makes everything else very difficult. And of course, for people who don't understand anxiety, I would never have trusted my father, to share feelings with that. I love him more than anything, but he grew up, like we spoke about with your parents, he grew up in World War II and very much in that scarcity thing. They don't really talk about your emotions, and a very strong guy. But my mum, on the other hand, was a psychologist. So I did have one person who could help me understand what it was. Because when you don't understand it yourself, you can't really seek help for it. And that was the thing that eventually enabled me to start to overcome it, because she printed out documents and said, here is exactly what anxiety is and how it shows up, so you can start to understand it and say, wow, that's speaking to me. And here are some ways that we can alleviate that. Learning how to breathe properly, like intentional breath, was massive. Once I realized that you can't pass out from anxiety by controlling your breathing, I was like, oh my God, I feel like I can turn up now. And that's what I've been able to do. It hasn't disappeared 100%, and I don't think it ever will, but I am so much better to be able to, it hasn't, put it this way, it hasn't stopped me from doing anything in over 15 years.
That's amazing. Yeah, the power of the breath is pretty incredible. It's one of the only functions that will operate with us or without our intent or with it, right? And obviously anxiety gets shallow breath for many people, and that's part of it is the lack of oxygen, right? The oxygen deprivation. It's fascinating. I'd love to reflect back just a little bit of an observation. You may already even know this or have seen this, but you call it situations that you couldn't escape. But what's interesting is those are all situations that you were expected to perform and that you could have been judged as good or bad based on what that performance was. And so it's interesting because it seems performance related and tied to the shame directly around, right? Am I going to have to justify, defend, or am I going to be viewed as worthy or okay? Was that a part of the narrative that you had identified and started to see? And how did you start to unpack this anxiety, not just through your breath, but to be able to get ahead of it? What were the practical, pragmatic tools and moments that you stopped yourself before anxiety took over?
Yeah, I can tell you honestly, I have never once thought about it being performance linked, and you are 100% right. That really, really makes sense. So thank you. The ways that I manage it now, so the things that I had to really get dialed in were things like nutrition. Like if I'm at a party or whatever, I don't, I'm within reason, I don't really care. But like if I'm at a kid's party and there's pizza there, I'm going to have a slice of pizza or whatever. But nutrition is a huge one. I'm very meticulous when I'm at home about what I eat. Very, very clean. I try to eat food that's not processed at all. I'm looking for, pasture-raised eggs. I'm looking for wild-caught fish. I'm looking for grass-fed beef. All of those types of things I'm looking for. Fitness, sleep, reading books to learn about the power of the mind, connecting with the most incredible people and most inspiring people I know. These are all the things that I have done that meant when we talk about the scale of how big that would be, it's so much smaller now. The voices in my head telling me to escape are so much smaller now. And the most recent time I had a situation like this was about a year ago when I was I was there being interviewed for a company in front of about 50 people. I had been staying in a hotel room where I just didn't get a great sleep the night before. You know what it's like when you're on the road. I couldn't find a healthy breakfast, and it had been a very, very long week of work stuff for me as well. So I was just physically and mentally very, very exhausted. And that's when all those things started to creep up. So I was able to be kind to myself and say, look, you're not that person that you used to be. You're just feeling run down. Breathe. And I also I seek out cold temperatures as well.
Yeah.
So if there's a water glass there and I'm in front of a big room, I might grab the water glass for a little bit, and then I can just press my hand up against my cheek, and that'll cool me down, focus on the breathing. And the worst case scenario, which for me was always like, I'm going to pass out and get knocked unconscious, hitting my head on something, and I'm going to throw up and die in a pool of my own vomit in front of this room, when your brain just comes up with these crazy scenarios. The worst case scenario, in actual fact, was that I politely excused myself and said, I'll be back in a minute. I haven't had to do that, but that's a much easier way of being able to handle a situation like that. So reducing the magnitude and the scale of all the things that could go wrong and the severity of what could go wrong, being kind to yourself and just focusing on the daily disciplines that have you operate at your best.
Yeah. You in a very nuanced way hit on two really profound things in there as well, beyond the grace and the understanding. What you're also talking about is nervous system regulation, and you're talking about it through the lens of our capacity. Right. So even the nature of when we are more tired, more fatigued, more run down, we have less capacity to actually keep the anxiety in check. Right. And it starts to run rampant. The other thing that you hit on, though, is that our bodies can actually lie to us sometimes. Right. Because the cellular activation can feel like anxiety. And if you don't pause yourself long enough to give yourself the grace, then you don't have the ability to slow it down. But like cellular activation in the body can make you feel like you're perseverating, like you're spinning, like you're losing something, because you can feel that jittery, and it's this indication potentially of the same physical sensation. So your ability to bring yourself into the present moment, reconcile through some questions and some breath, and then give yourself some grace. Like, I'm hoping that everybody heard those really clear pieces. Because again, our bodies and our minds and our emotions can lie to us, right? And that's why it's not just about mindset. It's about understanding the narratives that are tied to all and how to balance and regulate between, because they'll all tell us the truth and they'll all tell us lies. Yeah. Have you seen Inside Out 2 yet?
I have not.
Okay, go see it. Yeah. I think you'll love it, and take your kids. I took my kids, and I say this like jokingly, but it was actually real. So my son's on the spectrum, and anxiety is something big that he deals with. Both my kids have different anxiety type disorders, and it's tied to their neurodiversities and the way that they operate, and I'm sure their parents and how they inherited it from us. But it was interesting because we talk openly, obviously, in our house, given the work I do and how I do it. We went to the movie, though, and when I was sitting next in between both my kids, I looked over at both of them, and they were showing a visual representation of what they had experienced internally, but not been able to articulate. And so to the point, even on suffering earlier, I just leaned over to my son. I was like, hey, is that how you experience it? And he was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen anything otherwise. Because
is Inside Out where the characters, they actually are the emotion.
Yeah.
We watched one of them a few weeks ago.
So if you saw the original, you would have seen it. The second one brings in anxiety specifically.
Interesting.
And so they have this character that's literally anxiety. And it is for those, I'm saying this to adults, I prescribed a client to go see it. He called me and he's like, what book do I need to read? I need to get out of my own head. I was like, go see Inside Out 2. And he comes back, he's like, did you just prescribe me to go see a kid's movie? I was like, yeah, I did. Go see it, though. I think it's really, really incredible. You know, I want to spend a couple more minutes on anxiety because I think it's really important. I have learned in my life over time that anticipation and anxiety show up in the body the same way. How do you experience that? And how do you identify and distinguish which it is for you?
It's difficult because I also recognize that you need those nerves to perform at your best. So you need to, I once asked a famous speaker, someone who speaks every week all over the world. And I said, do you still get nervous before you do a presentation? And he said, the moment I don't is the moment I know it's time to hang up my boots.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, I think that's very, very interesting. So for me, it's just a recognition that doing that is just something that's important to me. But, you know, if you talk to sort of special forces people and everything else, that the time when you're in that situation, like once you're on the battlefield or you're on the starting blocks at the Olympics, it really is too late. Like if you are serious about anxiety and high performance, you need to plan for that stuff now. You need to do the training, you need to do the reps, you need to gradually build up to doing those different things. All of these things I'm just trying to put myself in uncomfortable situations as often as I can. Can you imagine that transition then of sort of experiencing all that anxiety to speaking on stage? Like that was a big thing. The first time I did that publicly was in front of 700 people. That was a massive transition with no notes, nothing. I was speaking before an Olympic gold medalist. I'm like, what am I doing here? It was a bizarre thing. The moment I overcame that, the thrill of being up on stage and being able to perform and get through in that environment made me fall in love with public speaking for the rest of my life. It's just such an incredible thing to be able to do. Dr. Jeff Spencer talks about that very few people in their life will have the experience of what is it like to be in a complete flow state. Once you've experienced that, your whole life changes. I wish every single person on this planet could put themselves in a position to perform at their absolute best in a domain that's important to them, because that will give them so much momentum for the rest of their life.
So powerful. And even the lessons with the folks that you had asked about speaking, right? It's interesting because speaking is actually where I learned this distinction for myself, because I get anxious every time I go on stage. About 4 years ago, though, I started to realize that I wasn't really worried about the outcome. I wasn't worried about what I was going to say. And to your point, I get into such flow on stage. I trust that it's just going to be what it needs to be, and it always is. So what I learned for myself is, and this is where the separation of anticipation and anxiety came from, I used to literally think it was nerves for anxiety purpose. Like I was nervous or I was concerned or I was caring about the outcome. For me, it's energy waiting to be deployed. I experienced it when I came in here today. New environment, right? Like I knew we were going to be sitting down doing a pod swap. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, it's energy waiting to be deployed within the container that it needs to be. And right now there's a buildup and manifestation of it internally. And so I say that because I think that could also be a helpful tool potentially for you. Because as you've gone through this process of distinguishing the differences, I think you have such an ability to be present, and you have so strong an ability to ground yourself. I've witnessed you center and recenter yourself through your breath multiple times. Like when you talk about this stuff, you live it, because I'm experiencing it and seeing and feeling you do it real time. Making sure you're listening to every word I have, like really listening, because that curiosity is also one of your superpowers. You have that unbelievable ability. So thank you for going deep with us on anxiety, because this is something that, again, faces our world at such a prevalent rate. And as soon as anxiety enters, growth and opportunity go out the window.
More and more. And one thing to sort of finish off on that point, the brain does not know the difference between memories from our past versus memories that we can create for our future, imagined memories. So I'm very big on this idea of manifestation. So or manifestation meditation specifically. I'm not a huge meditator, but I have a big event coming up. I'm speaking in front of 2,000 people at the MGM Concert Hall in Boston. It's a big speaking event. So I'm not walking in there for the first time. I will prepare and live that and go through it 100 times before I do it. Like that preparation of not just the content, but of experiencing it. Who are the faces that I'm going to see? What is my energy going to be like? What is the outcome that I want? And how can I show up in that situation? That's just what I'm doing. So I'm trying to imagine that I'm creating it, the success of it, before it's even happened.
That's really powerful. And, earlier you had talked about the amount of reps that you got in interviewing and having conversations with people, and then how you were getting reps telling other people's stories, right? And you're giving yourself the opportunity to create reps in this. I am a really, really, really big believer in reps, whether it's imagined and envisioned and manifested or real time lived. I think it's the only way for people to get clear, to refine, to focus, to get better is to actually get the reps, right? Again, I had a client yesterday, he wanted to get a video performed, but he hasn't filmed any content at all in a year. Yet he holds himself to this standard. He hasn't done any of the reps, right? He's not ready to do it. Did you fall into the understanding of reps? Was it something that you looked back on and realized it was a gift that you'd had? Or was there intentionality into this? Like it's something that not everybody understands, not everybody applies. You clearly do this in every area of your life.
Too many people fall in love with the outcome rather than falling in love with the reps, the work required to earn that outcome. So I've fallen in love with doing the reps every single day. Like I am acutely aware of the work that it takes to be able to achieve goals. That work primarily for people who are around big, not just big thinkers, but also big doers. That work primarily is around relationships. It's not so much coming up with these amazing tactics and strategies yourself. It's being able to circumvent all of those things to say, who are the one or two people I need to connect with who can open these 2 or 3 doors that I need or can help make this opportunity a reality for me. So a lot of people, if they feel like they haven't got the outcome that they want, they're either too excited about the outcome, not the reps, or they're doing the wrong reps. So making sure you're clear on what are the right reps for the goal you want, bringing relationships into that equation so you can not only enhance how big you want to go, but also accelerate your path of getting there. Like so much of my professional career, like by far the overwhelming focus has been on relationships. How can I make myself as valuable as possible so I have more value to give? If I look at just the relationship that you and I have now, I have people in my network that I can connect you with. I interviewed you on my podcast. You crushed it. You did an amazing job. I have all of these different things now to be able to help you. But if you met me 20 years ago, there isn't a huge amount of things that I would have been able to do for you. So turning yourself into someone of value is just such an important focus, and not reaching an endpoint on that. It's got to be something that you do for the rest of your life. Just get better and better so you have more to give. And as you give more, you get more. But that's not why you give. You give just to give and be a decent person. But the byproduct of that is that you just receive so much more back.
Yeah. Did you always allow yourself to receive?
No. That's something is difficult to do. As part of the Australian culture, we're not big on bravado or asking for things as much as we should. It's very much that culture in many places of people are happy to see you doing well on the condition that you're not doing so much better than they are. They call it tall poppy syndrome, where people want to cut you down. And it's one of the reasons I love living in LA, because people come to LA to follow their dreams. And it's incredible to have the network here.
Yeah.
I realize now, looking back at it, in every community in the world, you can find people who do want to help. So that was a little bit of a limiting belief that I had when I was young that I was able to overcome.
Is it one that you're still working on, or do you feel like it's figured out?
There's a difference between willingness and comfort of asking versus receiving. So I have no problem asking for what I want.
Okay.
I would happily send you an audio message or 1,000 people in my phone and ask for something if it was really, really important to me. And again, that context is really important. I wouldn't feel comfortable asking for something that wasn't important to me. But if it was something that I really, really needed, would really, really help me, I know that the people in my phone want to see me succeed. They want to see me healthy. They want to see me strong, and any role that they can play in helping facilitate that, they will do. The second part of that is the receiving process. It feels uncomfortable to receive. I don't love that. Even things like presents. I don't want any presents from anyone ever. I'm much more comfortable just giving. It's just the way I'm wired, I think.
Yeah. Well, offline, I'll share something with you that hopefully will help. But thank you for going in that. There is a really big difference between the two. You know, you've built your life and arguably the value that you say you've been working for 20 years by being more interested than interesting, right? You also talk about how you had to finally embrace your own story, right? To extend that level of value. You attribute a lot of this to sitting around the table with your parents, talking to some of the most interesting people, but that doesn't give you access to some of the legendary people that you now have had the chance to interview. When did you start to discover your passion for storytelling? And what role do you believe curiosity and wonder play in the process of developing a story?
I developed my passion for storytelling and reading interviews. It was through Success Magazine. At my lowest point, I had just come out of that, and I wanted to access all of the different materials from the most successful people on the planet to find out what they were doing that I wasn't, so I could become one of those people too. That's all I wanted to be. I wanted to be happy and successful. So I subscribed to Success Magazine because it's a great title, and they would send it every month, and I would read interviews with those people, and that's what it was. And then I realized, being in a bubble of Australia, I wanted to move to a country where I didn't know a single person. A lot of it was that idea of tall poppy syndrome. I didn't want to be cut down for stepping into my own power. So I moved to Boston, about as far away from Brisbane, Australia as you could possibly get. And that's what exposed me to entrepreneurship. And I realized, looking back, how much of a bubble that I was in. And I was in a new environment where there was no ceiling whatsoever. And that's when I started to interview people again for different business ventures. But then when I moved to LA in 2013, I was listening to podcasts where I would go and just take my laptop and work out of a cafe in Venice. And I would pause the podcasts, like Entrepreneurs on Fire from John Lee Dumas, when he asked a question, and I would answer it as if I was on the show. And that's what it became. And sure enough, like 4 years after that, I was interviewed on EO Fire. And it was just an incredible moment of manifestation of listening to a podcast, pressing pause and answering it as if I was a guest on the show. That was not my goal. It's just what happened through that whole process. So that's some of the cool things that happened through that.
No, I think that's extremely powerful. I've actually never done that. Yeah. Like, utilized other people's questions to go in and answer it.
I did it to master my craft of communication. Yeah. That's what it was. I wanted to get better in that process of sort of interviewing and being interviewed. Yeah. Communication is an absolute superpower.
Huge.
So I did it for the Tim Ferriss show. I did it for a whole bunch of different podcasts.
No, I think that's extremely powerful. I mean, I did about 600 podcasts in the course of 2 years as a guest. And that, basically, to the point of reps and compressing time, gave me that ability to start to micro bite-size lessons, compress things into 3 to 5 minute windows, like actually find ways to add value. It's really interesting. I love that you did that, and that you actually went through and you listened to these obscure questions and figured out, how would I answer that, and trusted that process. You know, part of why you're so powerful and the value that you provide, not just in your show, your podcasting, your interview processes, like, it is your ability to ask really good questions. I've said for years that I'm only as good as my questions, and that's an area that I've spent years working on to continue to ask questions, to the point that I don't like to ask closed-ended questions, and I've asked you 4 today unintentionally, right? I'm all about asking bigger open-ended questions. You know, in this process of starting to learn how to tell stories, you told us how you got tight in communicating your own. What has been your process for evolving your ability to ask deeper and more profound, impactful questions to get the best out of your guests?
Mark Victor Hansen has a great quote. He says, "The size of your question determines the size of your result." I think that's so cool. For me, listening...
I've never heard that. That's a great quote.
It's great, isn't it? Yeah, I think about that almost every day. Reading books and listening to podcasts, I'm constantly listening to, and I'm just absorbing information as much as I can at a playback speed of, between 1.5 and 2 times playback speed, just to be able to absorb as much information as I possibly can. What I'm looking for when I'm listening to other podcast interviews is I'm looking for the moment where the host didn't go into what the real question that needed to be asked. So when I went and did hundreds of podcasts when my book Thinking Grow Rich: The Legacy came out, I would always get asked the same question. And that was, what inspired you to write the book? And it's a bit like a band being asked to play their same radio hit 40 years after they did it. You reach a point where it's like, look, this is not a great, it's not a great question. And once you send me the interview, why would I send that out to my audience if they've heard that same interview over and over again? So I like to be around people who are going to ask deep questions and have great conversations, because that's what I just do. Like, you and I could be having this conversation without any cameras on. It would probably be very, very similar, right? Yep. That's we're both very upfront with who we are, and we just love having these deep conversations. So I would also watch stand-up comedians in terms of body language. I would wait to see where they pause, when they would change the volume of their voice. All these different things I would learn in terms of communication. A company that publishes one of my books, they invited me to this event in Long Beach many, many years ago. And we were there to meet some people. But they said one of the things that impressed me most, that impressed them most about me, was that every single person who was speaking, I had my notebook there and I was writing tips, ideas, all of these things constantly, just things that I could go and take and not think about, but go and action and use in my own way. So just constantly learning and observing what works. How can I get my message across better? What are the pain, what's the pain that people are struggling with? What's the real issue? Getting to the root cause of that. I've just done that now for many, many years. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that it becomes a superpower when you start to refine it, right? And I wouldn't say that you have it perfected, because I don't believe that, we're always developing, right? And what is perfection? You are one of the better interviewers I've ever experienced on the receiving side. I've been on a lot of shows, and we were talking about your ability to put yourself into a present moment and almost do holistic listening. If you were to describe how you listen, how would you describe that?
There are many things you should be listening for. I'm not listening to your words only. I'm listening with my eyes. I'm listening to your body language. I'm listening to everything. And I'm blocking out everything else. It's just so important to be present. And where I learned that from was the Jim Rohn quote, "Wherever you are, be there." The moment I heard that, I was like, wow, that's such a powerful quote. And being present is so good. Yeah. I did a breathwork course many, many years ago, probably 18 years ago. It was just when I was starting to come out of that anxiety rock bottom moment that I had. And this guy said to me, he goes, "If you're not interested in what you're doing, you just zone out." And I was like, wow, he was 100% right. I realized that I didn't develop the skill of listening. I didn't appreciate the skill of listening. I don't think it's something that we're born with. I think it's something that we develop and have a passion for. So I've just done enough reps for that now. Books like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi, Mark Goulston, Just Listen, all of these things. I love just all of these things, because it's not just words that someone's saying to you. There's so much more. And actually on that, Mark Goulston, who I mentioned earlier, he said, when he talks about these different ways that we listen, after I interviewed him, I came home and I was making dinner for my daughter, and she asked me a question. And normally I would continue chopping whatever I was doing. I put the knife down with the cutting board. I walked over there, I knelt down, and I was this far from her face. And I said, "What's the question?" And the shift in her body language when she saw me do that made me realize that I had not been listening to her for her entire life. And I thought, wow, I will never do that again. So that was a huge, huge shift for me.
That one hit me, because that one resonated, man. I had many moments I missed because I wasn't as present with my kids as I choose to be today. Yeah. That's powerful. On the nature of questions, what is a question that you wished people would ask you that they don't?
I don't know if it's necessarily a question or how you would frame the question, but there is, I'm sure, an assumption that a lot of things that I have are things that I was born with. And a lot of them are skills to develop. I moved to a new country, 350 million people. I didn't know a single person when I was over here. I left my MBA program. I applied to like 100 companies because I Met a girl who's now my wife, so it worked out, thankfully. I moved to LA. So I was in a new city after the MBA. I applied to more than 100 companies. I think I got one call back, and the salary they offered was like half of what I was making in the corporate world before I got the MBA. And I built everything up off the back of that, because the moment I did start working for someone, I realized, why am I spending all of my time to make this person's dreams come true? What if I allocated all of that energy to making my dreams come true? And that's what I did, and that's what I've been building. It has certainly not been a straight line. It's been very much like a stock market graph. There's been market corrections and things along the way. But that is the course now, where these things have really started to exponentially accelerate in recent times, because I've been doing the reps and laying that foundation.
Yeah.
So I wish more people would focus on those things, like what are the skills that you need to develop in terms of things like relationship building, communication, building a platform of your own so you have more value to offer other people, so all of the opportunities you want can find their way to you.
Yeah.
You attract them, you don't chase them.
Yeah. This is going to seem like a really weird question. I don't know why it just popped into my head, and it was like directly connected to what you said. But, you know, you talk about this concept of extreme ownership. You also give lots and lots and lots of credit to lots of others in your world that have provided insight, given you lessons, helped you see these things. You attribute, in a lot of ways, your value to the value you've extracted from other people. And I think it's an interesting dynamic. I don't know if that's accurate in how you experience it, but that's almost how I receive it when you communicate. Like, you're diminishing your own role in creating the value, as well as, whether it's inherent or because of the reps and the decisions around the skills, it's not just the knowledge you've extracted from others, it's your ability to absorb it, interpret it, and re-communicate it through your own lens that actually brings clarity and connection as a result of it. So I guess maybe it's not a question and more of an observation, but at what point do you fully own and take extreme ownership for the value that's inherently because of who you are?
It's a good question. And I if I was to answer that, my immediate instinct would be to say that I don't want that. I don't want any of that stuff to come back for me. It's me putting the stuff out there, knowing that great things are gonna happen. The reality is, me owning a little bit more of that would inspire people to perhaps rise up a little bit more, which of course is the objective at the end of the day. I ran an event last year, the Win the Day Mastermind. It's the first year I ever did it. We had 20 people from around the world, unbelievably transformational. I'm doing it again this year to see the growth of some of these people I've known for years has been truly extraordinary, where they have asked me for things in some cases many years ago, and I've challenged them to say, now is not the right time for you to receive that, for me to provide that.
Yeah.
And eventually, in some cases, it has been time, and I have provided opportunities to be able to help people that, because they were ready to flourish because of the right time, incredible things happened, which only made them realize more and more just how valuable, and they know that I always had their best interests at heart. And like you, I'm someone who I constantly always put other people above myself. I do my daily reps in terms of things like fitness and the work that I need to do, and I do my morning journal. I just hit 3 years of consecutive daily journal entries, which has been incredible. Time with the kids, I have all of those daily things, but once I have done all the stuff for me, I'm just focused on what can I do to help everyone else.
Which I think is great. Yeah, I really do. I want to just, as a new friend of yours, encourage you to continue to further step into it, because you are so grounded and so humble and so clear and so curious that ego is never going to be an issue for you.
Thank you. And you know what, I will say, having been in LA now for 11 years and been involved in the various projects that I've been involved in, I have seen so many bullshit artists come and go, so many smoke and mirrors. And I cannot with those people.
I sense that that's why you don't want the credit.
Yeah.
because you don't want to be perceived like many others that are snake oil salesmen and operate from a position of ego and control versus providing a value.
So I spoke at an event the other day.
Yeah.
There were like 8 speakers before me, and they were great. All the speakers were good, a lot of inspiration, but give me something I can use. So I got up there, and my everything that I do, like this podcast, just everything I do, I want it to be as valuable as possible. Dude. It needs to be something practical so someone can have a transformation in real time. Don't create a plan for the future. Do something now.
Yeah.
Get up. That's what it is. Yeah. And that's what I do in speaking, podcasting, events, anything else that I do. That's a big focus. And that's why you and I think, gravitated.
Dude, we're so aligned.
Exactly.
Yeah. So deeply aligned. You know, I'll say this and then I'm going to shift the questions, but there's a lot of people out there talking and very few with anything to say. You have stuff to say and people listen. So I don't want that to ever skip your consciousness, because that is inherently who you are and your value because of the reps and who you've created yourself to be. So you have something to say, which means there's always value.
Thank you.
Win the Day. Talk to us about how it was created, and both in combination with the Win the Day podcast, as well as the Win the Day approaches that you're integrating with corporations and entrepreneurs and other work. How are you seeing the concepts that you've created through Win the Day create impact in the world?
So I was listening to Napoleon Hill, author of Think and Grow Rich and many other books, and he talks about this idea that the poverty conscience will automatically overtake any mind that is not preoccupied with being success conscious. I know that sounds...
Can you say that again?
I will.
Please?
I'm going to say it again.
Okay.
The poverty conscience will automatically overtake any mind that is not already preoccupied with being success conscious. Whew. And isn't that brilliant? And I heard that and I was like, wow, that is so powerful. But it's very difficult to understand. What if I can distill that into something? So I realized if you can't win, then you fail. So you need to win. So what does that look like? And then interviewing people about resilience and everything, which a story I'm sure you know all too well, is that resilience is not a line you cross forever. It's something you recommit to on a daily basis. So winning the most important parts of your life, you need to recommit to on a daily basis. And that's when I was like, wow, win the day. And that's what it became. So win the day is where it was born, from the fundamental idea that each day, if you do not make the decision to win, you have automatically made the decision to lose. If you don't know what winning looks like to you today, you're going to fall victim to distraction, procrastination, hanging around deadbeats who are not good for your self-esteem, eating crappy food, being around just small people who just think small and just talk about things that are not even remotely relevant to you playing at a higher game and really fulfilling that potential. That's what win the day means. And then recently, I had an opportunity where I've been on an interesting path the last sort of couple of years in terms of things I wanted to focus on. We had a couple of sort of challenges in our family in terms of just health issues with our son when he was born, and waking up 4 times a night, which really is a very difficult environment to be in when you've got 2 working parents, a lot of travel and everything else. So I realized I needed to remove myself from a lot of the things that I wasn't 100% all in on. I might have been 95% in and possibly thought that I was maybe trying to convince myself that I was 100% in on, but I wasn't all the way there. I removed myself from all of those things, and I realized as part of that, I had 2 non-negotiables. I want to do one thing for the rest of my life, and I want to be the best in the world at it. And I realized I had never gone all in on Win the Day. I'd had it as a passion project for the podcast, but I'd never gone all in. So 2 years ago, I thought about what can I do? And then Success Magazine reached out and we said, we love the Win the Day brand. Can you create a course for Success Magazine, which I did, called the Win the Day Accelerator. And we run live virtual events for them all the time, which is such a great partnership to have. And then I realized I've got all these different avenues covered now. That's like a low ticket thing, because I just wanted to create something that can really help everyone. For all the questions that I get every single day, I don't need to give them my time. I can say, go and buy this course for a couple of $100. It'll change your life more than any other resource I've ever created. Guaranteed. If it's not the best thing you've ever done, I'll give you your money back. Absolutely no questions asked. So that's already there. And then I thought about the life situation that I was in, having young kids, where it can put your marriage in a bit of a rocky situation. Your physical health starts to go, your mental health starts to go. You lose connection with a lot of friends in your life. That's the time when you need to go back to doing the rituals and doing the things that help you operate at your best. So my mission then became, how do I take this win the day philosophy that I have and apply it to the corporate world where there are high concentrations of people aged 30 to 55 years old who really need this. So my mission now for the rest of my life is to embed the win the day mentality into the DNA of companies all around the world. That's what I'm focused on.
I love that. And what I also appreciate is that most of the ways that you define win the day, at least that I heard, are really about winning the day for yourself, not winning against someone else, right? And it's turning the lens to competition inward versus feeling you have to compete outward. What I also hear, even though it's nuanced, is that when you say, I want to do one thing for the rest of my life and I want to be the best in the world at it, you also recognize and realize that you have zero control over that second one, right? All you can do is become the best version of yourself at what you're doing and hope that that and the reps in and of itself elevate you to a place where you stand out, right? But what I'm not hearing from you is, man, I want to take down Joe Rogan in the podcasting world. Like, it's not about other people. It's about you being the best you can be and therefore knowing you're capable of being the best in the world.
Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game.
No.
You know, it's been a long time. The only time I thought life was a zero-sum game was when I wasn't feeling good about who I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's it. Like, I'm very much connected with that abundance mindset.
I just called attention to the nuance on that because, again, even hearing the concept of win, some people get stuck, and I'm highly competitive. I love, like, I hate losing more than I like winning in some cases, right?
Exactly.
Like, and so I get that, but it's also, I had to realize who was I competing with, and it was almost always here, and that's what I'm hearing you say. So,
and that helps connect with the intensity of the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, totally.
With myself,
You know, you've talked about being a father, and that's kind of where I want to wrap a little bit from our conversation today. You know, we talked about on your show a little while ago about how our kids are often one of the greatest reflections of ourselves. And so that's what I would like to ask you is, what is the greatest realization you had about yourself because of the reflection your kids put back on you?
Great question. That I am someone who is still a kid. That's it. I became an adult through societal expectations. I once heard that play is the language of children, but I think play is the language of humanity. And more, spending more and more time with my kids of just being able to play outside with no devices or anything like that, hearing the laughs, the smiles, the innocence, to capture that, to connect with that. That's what I've learned more than anything else.
That's really powerful. And I would suggest that it's that part that's beat out of us because of the expectations of society and all of the should narratives that exist on who we should become. Right? Parents, teachers, coaches, employers all start to impact, again, the curiosity, the creativity, the wonder, and the play. It's inherent to who we are.
For sure. It's interesting, right? Because you've got this dichotomy. The moment things like curriculum, uniforms, expectations all come in, that's when we lose that sense. But at the same time, someone told me a year ago, and I always said that was it and that was the end of conversation. And someone told me a year ago, said, your daughter wearing a uniform now feels like she belongs to another community, another tribe that's not part of her family. And that's a really cool thing to have as well. So I think being able to embrace the benefits of that tribalism in a good way, while at the same time nurturing that creativity and that play and that fun as much as we can.
I couldn't agree with that more. And so that's actually directly correlated to where I was thinking of going next, which was, you have taken extreme ownership, refused to even acknowledge any unintentional consequences about what could have happened as a result of your upbringing. And I love the loyalty and commitment. But you also have allowed yourself to recognize not only your personal development opportunities, but ways that you want to raise your kids. So this is a two-part question. How are you and your wife today fostering the curation of play, wonder, and curiosity through the pragmatic lives that we live within your children? And if you had to state what you hope most for your children in your role as raising them and who they will become, what is that?
My focus when we had kids was I just wanted them to get used to three things: noise, travel, and people. That was the big focus. I was not the type of person that would get your kid to have the most optimal environment. Yes, of course, we have things like the curtains and everything else to try and make it as comfortable and help them sleep in their familiar environment as much as we can. But I also want a kid that if I can throw in a car and you're going to miss your nap today and that's okay because we've got this other commitment that we need to be a part of, or we're going to fly 14 hours to Australia or 12 hours to Fiji. You're going to meet so many new people you haven't seen for years, and you need to be okay with that. And I now have 2 kids who are extremely comfortable with noise, travel, and people. And that's been a really big win. My wife and I are very good at the awareness of removing each other when stress starts to eke out into the family dynamic. My wife will say to me, I got it from here. Go and do the work you got to do. Go and calm yourself down, whatever it needs to be, just as I would do that for her. So that's a big focus that we have.
That's huge. Yeah, that's huge. All right, so we're wrapping up. I've got just a couple quick more questions for you. One, I told you on your show my concept of this idea that the second we protect ourselves, we disconnect ourselves. Where are you consciously or unconsciously still protecting yourself today?
I'm not someone who's ever been accused of thinking small. Like, I'm a very big thinker. A big doer. And honestly, I don't think that's that character trait. I think comes more from not overthinking things. You know, I don't come from a background of being an accountant, so I'm not textbook smart enough to be able to evaluate risk and do the due diligence in the ways that it needs to be done. I don't look at 100 reasons why I shouldn't do something. I look at the one reason why I should do something. As part of this new phase that I'm entering into, the biggest thing I need to focus on, which I've been writing down at the different masterminds and things that I've been attending over the years, is take more risks. So in the next couple of years, you're going to see this thing just crush because it's all ready to go.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, James, I am so grateful for our time together today and this connection, and for you being so open, so vulnerable, and so real and accessible to me and the people who are listening today. Is there a closing thought you'd like to leave everybody with?
First of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm grateful for our friendship, brother, and always here for anything you need. It would be this idea that you need to make the decision to win, or you've automatically made the decision to lose. If every single day you can wake up, look yourself in the mirror, and just attribute that to memory. It's why I have the Win the Day bracelet on. Make the decision to win. If you don't consciously think about those little things like doing something difficult, like a cold shower to start your day or whatever you want to do, or writing down 3 things that will make today a win, or as your final thought before you go to bed, thinking about the one big goal that you want to accomplish in the next couple of years, like do a few of these things. Make the decision to win, or you've automatically made the decision to lose.
Dude, I love it. We're going to have all your stuff in the show notes for people to follow. And for those of you that just watched James flip open his lid and jump in, it's awesome to see how the story of life and extreme ownership can allow us to start to evolve. How anxiety and these little underpinnings that we don't think are big deals can actually derail everything for as long as 22 minutes in a panic attack. But our commitment to understand ourselves, look at where these things can move, get in touch with our bodies, our minds, and set our minds and focus on things that we can manifest and create, all comes down to exactly how he closed the show. James has chosen and made the decision to win from day one. And now he's teaching all of you to do the same, and it's possible, but it is going to require you to flip open your lid and scan your can.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.